Imagine a frozen Belgian village in the dead of winter, 1945. Snow blankets the ground like a shroud, muffling the distant rumble of artillery. A small, unassuming American paratrooper rounds the corner of a battered farmhouse, his breath clouding in the biting air. Before him stands a nightmare, 90 German soldiers, armed and furious, their eyes locked on him. Outnumbered, outgunned, with a machine pistol jammed into his gut, he does the unthinkable, he laughs. What unfolds next in those frantic seconds will etch his name into the annals of heroism, turning a man once dismissed as too small, too ordinary, into a legend who single-handedly slaughters over 20 enemies and saves his company from annihilation. This is the story of Leonard Funk, the paratrooper the Germans thought was harmless, until he proved them deadly wrong. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. entered the world on August 27, 1916, in the gritty steel town of Braddock Township, Pennsylvania, nestled along the Monongahela River just outside Pittsburgh. The air there was thick with the acrid smoke of mills, and life was hardscrabble even before the Great Depression hit in 1929. Young Leonard, the eldest of two boys, grew up fast. His father worked the furnaces, his mother kept the home, and by his teens, Leonard was already shouldering responsibilities, caring for his younger brother, scraping together odd jobs in a world where opportunity had dried up like the river in drought. High school graduation in 1934 brought no fanfare. College was a pipe dream for a kid from the wrong side of the tracks. Instead, he labored in the shadows of those towering smokestacks, his slight frame, 5 feet 5 inches, a wiry 140 pounds, belied by a quiet determination that simmered beneath the surface. As storm clouds gathered over Europe and Asia in the late 1930s, America edged toward war. By June 1941, with the draft extended and Pearl Harbor still months away, Funk's number came up. At 24, he reported to the induction center in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, where recruiters eyed his diminutive stature with skepticism. Too small for the fight, some might have muttered. But Funk had other ideas. He volunteered for the paratroopers, a bold, experimental force born from the audacious notion of dropping soldiers from the sky behind enemy lines. It was untested, dangerous, and demanded the toughest of the tough. Training at Camp Blanding, Florida, was a crucible. 5 weeks of relentless runs, obstacle courses, climbs and calisthenics that broke half the recruits.
Then came the jump towers, the C-47 aircraft drills, the heart-pounding leaps into the unknown.
Funk, older than most of his wide-eyed comrades, many barely out of their teens, pushed through with grit. He earned his wings and joined Company C, 1st Battalion, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment. By late 1943, they shipped out to England, integrating with a battle-hardened 82nd Airborne Division, fresh from the blood-soaked fields of Sicily and Italy.
D-Day, June 6, 1944, thrust Funk into the inferno.
At 27, now a squad leader thanks to his steady nerve, he plummeted from the night sky over Normandy amid a storm of flak and tracers. His chute deployed, but the landing was brutal, a sprained or fractured ankle that sent shockwaves of pain through his leg. Chaos reigned, scattered drops, lost equipment, Germans everywhere. Funk buried his parachute, shouldered his gear, and gathered 18 disoriented paratroopers. For 10 grueling days, they trekked 40 miles through enemy territory, moving under cover of darkness, hunkering down by day, skirmishing when cornered. Despite his injury, Funk insisted on scouting ahead, rifle at the ready, his limping steps a testament to unyielding resolve. "We stick together," he'd say in that calm Pennsylvania drawl, his voice cutting through the fear like a knife. Miraculously, all 19 reached Allied lines on June 17, unscathed. For this odyssey of leadership and endurance, Funk earned the Silver Star for gallantry, a Bronze Star for meritorious service, and his first Purple Heart. But Normandy was just the beginning. Whispers among his men spoke of his quiet strength, yet to outsiders, he still looked like the underdog, the short guy who didn't quite fit the paratrooper mold. September brought Operation Market Garden, the Allies' daring bid to punch through the Netherlands and cross the Rhine. 35,000 paratroopers descended in the largest airborne assault in history, but it unraveled into a quagmire of missed bridges and fierce resistance. Near Nijmegen, Funk's company seized key ground amid glider landings under withering fire. Spotting 3 German 20mm flak guns shredding the incoming reinforcements, Funk didn't hesitate. With just 2 men beside him, he charged the entrenched position, 20 to 25 Germans behind sandbags and camouflage. Outnumbered 7 to 1, they stormed in, grenades flying, rifles barking. Funk led the assault, neutralizing the crews, silencing the guns. Gliders landed safely because of it. For this brazen act, he received the Distinguished Service Cross, America's second highest honor for valor. Yet even as medals piled up, Funk remained unassuming, his small stature belying the giant within. Comrades joked about his height, but they followed him without question. As autumn chilled into winter, the Ardennes offensive exploded on December 16, 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's desperate gamble hurled 400,000 troops and 1,400 tanks at the Allies, aiming for Antwerp. The front buckled. American units shattered in the snow-swept forests. Then came the horror of Malmedy. 113 GIs surrendered to SS panzer troops, only to be machine-gunned in a field. 84 died. Survivors played dead amid the groans and blood.
Word spread like wildfire through the ranks. No mercy for the SS.
Funk, hearing the tales, hardened. No prisoners, became the grim mantra. By January 1945, the tide turned, but the fight was far from over. Company C, depleted and weary, pushed toward Holzheim, Belgium. Their executive officer killed, Funk stepped up, cobbling together a ragtag platoon of 30 non-combatants, clerks, cooks, supply guys, with zero frontline experience. They slogged 15 miles through blizzards, artillery pounding the earth around them. Reaching the village, a cluster of 15 stone houses held by Germans, Funk orchestrated the assault. House by house, they cleared it, capturing 80 prisoners, then 50 more. Only 4 guards watched the lot in a farmhouse yard while the rest mopped up. But as the afternoon sun dipped low on January 29, danger lurked. A German patrol in white camouflage slipped in, mistaken for Americans. They overpowered the guards, freed the prisoners, armed them. Now 90 strong, they poised to strike Company C from behind. Funk, returning to check, turned the corner, and froze. The odds were impossible. A German officer jammed an MP-40 into his belly, screaming surrender.
Funk, staring death down, remembered Malmedy. And then, he laughed.
What happened next would shock both sides, turning a moment of certain defeat into one of the most audacious acts of bravery in World War II. The laughter started low, a dry, almost disbelieving chuckle that grew into something sharper, colder. The German officer's face twisted in confusion, the muzzle of his MP-40 still digging into Funk's coat. Around them, the yard was a frozen tableau, 4 American guards on their knees, hands raised, the 80-plus newly freed German prisoners clutching rifles, submachine guns, and grenades they'd just taken back. Snow drifted lazily between the men like ash from some distant fire.
The Germans exchanged uneasy glances.
This short American sergeant, barely taller than many of them, was laughing in the face of death. According to the official Medal of Honor citation, Funk pretended to comply. Slowly, deliberately, he began unslinging his Thompson submachine gun from his shoulder, the heavy .45 caliber weapon that paratroopers affectionately called the Tommy gun. The German officer relaxed just a fraction, expecting surrender. That was his mistake. In a blur of motion that later accounts would describe as lightning fast, Funk whipped the muzzle up and squeezed the trigger. The Thompson roared, spitting a full magazine, 20 rounds, in a tight arc. The officer crumpled first, blood blooming across his white camouflage smock. Others around him jerked and fell as bullets tore through. Chaos erupted. The Germans shouted, some firing wildly, others diving for cover behind the farmhouse wall or into the snow.
But Funk didn't stop.
He kept firing, reloading with practiced speed, all the while bellowing at the top of his lungs, grab their weapons,
get their guns.
The 4 American guards, stunned for only a heartbeat, reacted. They lunged forward, snatching rifles from fallen Germans, wresting pistols from holsters, turning the tide in seconds. What had been a moment of certain American defeat flipped into pandemonium. Germans who moments earlier had tasted freedom now faced a nightmare, their own weapons turned against them by men who'd just been prisoners themselves. The fight was brutal, close, personal, rifle butts cracking skulls, point-blank shots, screams swallowed by the wind. Historical records, including the Medal of Honor citation and eyewitness recollections preserved in unit histories, confirmed the outcome. In the ensuing melee, 21 Germans were killed outright. Many more were wounded, bleeding into the snow. The remainder, perhaps 50 or 60, threw down their arms and surrendered again, hands high, faces pale with shock. The entire episode lasted less than a minute. Some later accounts, drawing from veteran stories, narrow it to 45 seconds of unrelenting fury. Funk stood amid the smoke and bodies, Thompson still smoking, unscathed. He had turned impossible odds into victory through sheer audacity, quick thinking, and the kind of raw courage that doesn't wait for permission. Word of the incident spread quickly through Company C. Men who'd fought beside Funk since the jump into Normandy now looked at him with something close to awe. The little first sergeant who'd once been ribbed about his size had just single-handedly, and then with minimal help, neutralized a force nearly 3 times larger than his own tiny guard detail. If those Germans had broken free and hit the scattered American squads from behind, the cleanup in Holzheim could have turned into a slaughter. Instead, the village stayed secure. Company C consolidated its gains, mopping up the last pockets of resistance without further major losses. For this action, Funk was recommended for the Medal of Honor. The citation, approved and presented by President Truman at the White House on September 5, 1945, reads in part, although overwhelmingly outnumbered and facing almost certain death, First Sergeant Funk, pretending to comply with the order, began slowly to unsling his submachine gun from his shoulder and then, with lightning motion, brought the muzzle into line and riddled the German officer. In the ensuing fight 21 Germans were killed, many wounded, and the remainder captured. First Sergeant Funk's bold action and heroic disregard for his own safety were directly responsible for the recapture of a vastly superior enemy force, which if allowed to remain free, could have taken the widespread units of Company C by surprise and endangered the entire attack plan. But the war wasn't over for Funk yet. The Bulge still raged in pockets. The Allies pushed deeper into Germany. Funk, now acting company executive officer after the original XO was killed earlier in the assault, continued leading, his quiet Pennsylvania voice steady amid the shellfire and snow. He'd already collected a chest full of awards: the Distinguished Service Cross for Nijmegen, Silver Star and Bronze Star from Normandy, 3 Purple Hearts for wounds across 3 campaigns. The Medal of Honor would crown them all, making him one of the most decorated paratroopers of the entire war. After VE Day in May 1945, Funk returned home a hero, though he rarely spoke of the details. He married, raised a family, and spent decades working for the Veterans Administration, quietly helping other soldiers navigate the system he knew too well. He passed away on November 20, 1992, at age 76, and rests today at Arlington National Cemetery, one of the last surviving Medal of Honor recipients from the 82nd Airborne's World War II era. Leonard Funk's story isn't just about one frozen afternoon in Belgium. It's about how ordinary men, dismissed or underestimated, can rise in moments that matter most. The Germans saw a small, laughing American and thought him useless.
They were wrong.
In under a minute, he proved that true measure isn't in stature or numbers, it's in the will to act when everything says you shouldn't. And so the legend of the man who laughed at death endures, a reminder etched in snow and blood. Sometimes the greatest danger comes not from the enemy you expect, but from the one who refuses to yield. The snow kept falling, soft and relentless, covering the fresh blood in the farmhouse yard like a merciful veil.
The crack of the last shot faded into the wind, leaving only the groans of the wounded and the ragged breathing of men who just stared down oblivion.
First Sergeant Leonard Funk stood there, Thompson's submachine gun hot in his gloved hands, the barrel still trailing thin wisps of smoke. Around him lay 21 German bodies, some twisted in the snow, others slumped against the stone wall, while the survivors dropped their weapons one by one, hands rising in surrender. The 4 American guards, now rearmed and fierce, moved quickly to secure the prisoners again, binding wrists with whatever cord or belts they could find. No one spoke much in those first moments. The air was thick with the metallic tang of cordite and the coppery scent of blood. Historical accounts, including the official Medal of Honor citation published in War Department General Orders No. 75 on September 5, 1945, describe the scene with stark precision. In the ensuing fight 21 Germans were killed, many wounded, and the remainder captured. Eyewitness recollections from 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment veterans, preserved in unit histories and later interviews, paint a more visceral picture. One paratrooper later recalled the sudden roar of Funk's Tommy gun cutting through the stunned silence, the way the German officer's eyes widened in disbelief right before the bullets hit. Another spoke of Funk's voice, calm but commanding, shouting grab their weapons, even as he reloaded, turning panic into purpose. The entire action, from the first burst to the final surrender, unfolded in under a minute, some veterans estimating 45 seconds of pure, unrelenting violence. With the threat neutralized, Funk didn't pause to celebrate. He reorganized the guards, ensured the prisoners were under tight control, and pushed his small force to link back up with the rest of Company C. The village of Holzheim, those 15 stone houses now cleared and quiet, remained in American hands. The potential rear attack that could have unraveled the entire company's gains was averted. Casualties among Funk's men were minimal. The makeshift platoon of clerks and cooks he'd led into the assault earlier that day had held firm under his example. As night fell, the snow deepened, burying the evidence of the afternoon's fury. Company C dug in, waiting for reinforcements, while word of what had happened began filtering back through the ranks. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire among the paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne. Men who jumped into Normandy with Funk, who'd charged flak guns at Nijmegen beside him, now nodded with quiet respect. He'd always been the steady one, the short, unassuming first sergeant who never raised his voice unless he had to.
But this was different.
It wasn't just bravery. It was the kind of cold, calculated defiance that turned certain death into dominance. The Germans had seen a small man and assumed weakness. Funk had laughed, then proven them catastrophically wrong. By spring 1945, as the Allies crossed the Rhine and drove into Germany's heart, Funk continued serving as acting executive officer for Company C. The war ground on, house-to-house fighting, sniper fire, the endless mud and exhaustion, but his legend had already taken root. When VE Day came on May 8, the most decorated paratrooper of the European theater returned home. He'd earned the Medal of Honor, presented by President Truman at the White House on September 5, 1945, the Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star, and 3 Purple Hearts, one for each major campaign he'd survived. No other man in the 508th PIR, or perhaps the entire 82nd Airborne, carried such a chest of valor. Yet Funk never wore the hero mantle comfortably. Back in Pennsylvania, he married, started a family, and took a job with the Veterans Administration, spending decades quietly assisting other veterans with claims, benefits, and the paperwork that came after the guns fell silent. He rarely spoke of Holzheim or the laughter that preceded the gunfire. When asked, he'd shrug it off with that same calm drawl. It was just what needed doing. Comrades who visited him later in life noted how little had changed. He was still the unassuming man from Braddock Township, still 5'5", still carrying the weight of memory without complaint. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. passed away on November 20, 1992, at the age of 76. He rests now at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 7A, Grave 819, a place of honor among America's greatest. His grave marker bears the simple inscription of a soldier who rose far beyond what anyone expected. Looking back, the story of January 29, 1945, isn't merely about one man killing 21 enemies in a frozen yard. It's about the alchemy of courage, how a dismissed, underestimated soldier, armed with nothing more than quick wits, a submachine gun, and an unbreakable will, could rewrite the odds in seconds. The Germans thought he was useless. The Allies learned he was indispensable. And in that laugh, defiant, almost incredulous, echoes a truth that outlasts wars. True strength isn't measured in size or numbers, but in the refusal to break when everything demands it. The frozen fields of Belgium have long since thawed, the farmhouse walls weathered by decades. But the memory endures, in Medal of Honor citations, in the quiet pride of the 82nd Airborne, in the stories told around campfires and now in documentaries like this one. Leonard Funk didn't seek legend. Legend found him, in a moment when laughter became the prelude to immortality. The war in Europe ended not with a thunderclap, but with quiet surrenders and the slow thawing of the Ardennes snow. By May 1945, the guns fell silent across the continent. Leonard Funk, still wearing the mud and memory of Holzheim, returned to the United States with his company. He was honorably discharged in June 1945, carrying home a chest full of ribbons that told a story louder than words: the Distinguished Service Cross from Nijmegen, the Silver Star and Bronze Star from Normandy, 3 Purple Hearts for wounds across 3 brutal campaigns, and now the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor, awaiting formal presentation. On September 5, 1945, some records note August 23 as the ceremony date, but the White House event is firmly tied to early September. President Harry S. Truman stood in the Oval Office, the Blue Room nearby filled with family, fellow veterans and a handful of dignitaries. Truman, himself a World War I artilleryman who knew the weight of combat, pinned the blue ribbon and gold star around Funk's neck. The citation, read aloud in the hush of the room, recounted every detail: the 15-mile march through the blizzard, the improvised platoon of clerks turned fighters, the capture of Holzheim without a single American casualty, and then that frozen yard where one man's laugh and lightning draw saved his comrades from disaster. First Sergeant Funk's bold action and heroic disregard for his own safety were directly responsible for the recapture of a vastly superior enemy force, the words concluded, which, if allowed to remain free, could have taken the widespread units of Company C by surprise and endangered the entire attack plan. Funk stood there, 5'5" in his dress uniform, expression steady as ever. He didn't linger on the spotlight. Photos from the day show him shaking the president's hand, a small, genuine smile breaking through. The same quiet Pennsylvania grit that had carried him through jumps, charges, and that impossible minute in the snow. Back home in the Pittsburgh area, first McKeesport, then settling near his roots in Braddock Township, he stepped into civilian life without fanfare. He married, started a family, and raised 2 daughters who grew up knowing their father as dad first, hero second. The stories of Normandy scatters, glider saving assaults, and laughing in the face of an MP-40 stayed mostly tucked away. He shared them sparingly, usually only when old comrades visited or when a young veteran needed to hear that ordinary men could do extraordinary things. For decades, Funk worked for the Veterans Administration in the Pittsburgh Regional Office. He rose to division chief before retiring in 1972, spending his career helping other soldiers, men who'd come home missing limbs, haunted by memories, or just needing help with paperwork, navigate the same system that had welcomed him back. He understood the invisible wounds as well as the visible ones. Colleagues remembered him as patient, thorough, the kind of man who listened without judgment and got things done. In his later years, the honors kept coming quietly: a plaque at the Veterans Memorial in Braddock Hills near his childhood home, a post office in McKeesport named in his memory, the enduring respect of the 82nd Airborne Association. He attended reunions when he could, swapping stories over coffee, always deflecting praise with a shrug and that calm drawl. Just did what needed doing, he'd say. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. passed away on November 20, 1992, at 76. He rests at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 7A, Grave 819, beneath a simple stone that bears his name, rank, and the Medal of Honor emblem. The inscription doesn't need embellishment. The life it marks already tells the tale. Today, his story lives on in the quiet strength it represents, a reminder that heroes don't always look the part. The short guy from the steel towns, once dismissed as too small for the fight, proved time and again that courage isn't measured in inches or odds. He laughed at death, turned the tables in a heartbeat, and then spent the rest of his days helping others stand tall after their own battles. In the end, Leonard Funk came home, built a good life, loved his family, served his fellow veterans, and left the world a little better, and a lot braver, than he found it. That's a victory worth celebrating, one that echoes warmer and longer than any battlefield roar.
End of Part 4, Final Part.
The story of Leonard Funk concludes here, with gratitude, pride, and a happy, peaceful close to an extraordinary life.